Happy Friday, everybody.
Good morning. Today's a big day.
Yep. It's not only March 19th, but it's the 1-year anniversary of Transmission.
Yes. Happy anniversary to us.
Wow. It's pandemic anniversaries aren't as fun as regular ones, but we're survivors. This show has survived 181 episodes over the course of 1 year.
Yeah. So we've been on half the time. It's kind of amazing. So, this would be a great day to send us an anniversary present.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You could give a little donation to Transmission.
Yeah, through the Micah page or the CPI page. Or you could message me you can ask my email or my mailing address and send me a 10-gallon drum of gummy bears. I'm so willing to accept that as a donation.
So, and we have a guest who apparently can't hear us. So,
really, the sound went out again.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. Oh no.
We'll try to bring Ellen back on. We were having issues beforehand and it got fixed, and now it's gone again. Something with this platform and her browser. So we'll try again. But
hopefully she can be with us.
Just to set it up a little bit, in the meantime, this is the third part of a 3-part series on purity culture. And Ellen, who's been on the show a couple times before, said, hey, I'd love to come talk about that. And maybe if she's able to join us, she can show us her memorabilia from her purity culture phase. It's quite astonishing. It's framed and everything.
And we should introduce ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm Daniel Walpert. I direct Micah, the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing.
And I'm Mark Van Steenwyk. I direct the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
And and so, while we're waiting for Ellen to come back on, given it's the 1-year anniversary, you can think about that for a minute or so. Yeah, I mean, who knew that when you and I started off sitting awkwardly in the room in Simone Bay together,
trying to be 6 feet apart, not realizing no masks on, using the knowledge of the time just to kind of be a little bit apart.
Yeah, that here we'd be a year later, and we've got quite the chronicle, really, of the entire pandemic year.
I like to believe that future civilizations will be rummaging through the rubble of our civilization, and they'll find somehow a record of these broadcasts, and it'll shape their entire understanding of our world today.
Or we could, put it all on a disc and send it into outer space, right? Can you imagine if transmission was the only evidence of earthly civilization that some alien culture had to watch? It'd be a slanted view.
I think we should be the official representative of everything about our society. And hopefully when they find these transmissions, it'll be like their sacred writ, like the Bible for them.
There you go.
So Ellen's back. Let's see if she can hear us now. Can you hear us, Ellen?
I can hear you.
Praise the Lord.
But while I was logged out, I didn't hear anything you were talking about before. And I heard just the tail end of what you were saying, that this will be the sacred writ of the people who come after us.
Yes, indeed.
The space aliens that find Earth.
Oh, space aliens.
Before we dig into the topic, I think you should show your memorabilia that shows your bona fides, your bona fides of your purity culture years.
So most of my purity culture years memorabilia has been sloughed off, but this is a little...
True Love tour from Joshua Harris.
Yes.
So 21 years ago.
And this is not the first time I saw Joshua Harris. I actually saw him when I was like 11 because my aunt was part of like getting him set up for this big conference in San Francisco. So I was one of like a row of teenagers, maybe there were 20 of us, who were there ahead of time and shook his hand, and he signed the book I Kissed Dating Goodbye, dedicated to my older brother, and what the inside said was, "Do it for Jesus," the number 4.
Do what for Jesus?
Yeah, I was gonna be.
Jesus.
Shouldn't be. Don't do it for Jesus.
That's a good question, Dan.
I don't want to know the answer to that question. And I also know that you showed us beforehand. There's also some stuff from Chick Publications, which are the great little groovy little comic book format
and adultery are rebellion against God.
Indeed.
All people are doomed.
Yes.
It's kind of fun to joke about this stuff because of its absurdity, and for a lot of us, it dominated our teen years. This sort of conformity, and then it seems like the entire engine of contemporary Christian music culture was created to create some energy for this sort of purity culture, so that you didn't feel like you were missing out on the fun of regular sinful culture. So we come up with our own fun, of really shitty Christian music and film and T-shirts and other apparel.
Yeah, you listened to System of a Down, maybe try POD.
That's right. I love those. You know, you go into these Christian, for those who didn't catch that reference, you go into a Christian bookstore. I don't know if it's still this way today, but if you're like trying to find music, they'd say like, do you like U2? Then you're going to love Michael W. Smith, which is, I'm honestly saying that's what one of them said. And I'm like, that's not even a comparison. But that's how it works. Do you love Megadeth? Check out Petra. And it's funny until it's not. And so this is going to be a grim segue. Already Leah posted this, and we were going to talk about this anyways. Can you talk about purity culture via the Atlanta shooter?
Right. And so the other thing that today is Friday, right? Which is has become in our moniker Fascism Friday. And so, you know, purity and fascism and fetishism and violence, sadly, all go together.
That's right.
And you know, I think most people are familiar with the fact that that European fascism, at any rate, was all about purity, right? The pure race, the Aryan race. You know, whiteness in America was all about no race mixing, and all of this is connected to this idea of purity and you know, being sort of the best for God, which then, of course, sets up the reality of fetishizing other races, other peoples, women from other races, and creates all kinds of very toxic thought and behavior patterns.
Yeah, and it's interesting seeing the responses to this. Everyone, it's disheartening to see all the people defending, like, why we can't say this was some sort of racism because the guy said it was about sex, and so people dismissing, or he was just crazy, as though somehow the sort of purity culture with its white supremacy, which is baked in, they're tied together, that somehow that can influence the way someone who's feeling unstable responds to the things that frustrate them. So this is all like, you can't ever boil things down to one pure essential like motive for anything. But the fact that purity culture played into this, white supremacy played into this, I'm willing to grant that mental health played into this, that you can't divvy them out. And if we don't use this as an opportunity to at least examine the role of purity culture, how it ties with white supremacy, and how those fuel violence in our society, then we're fucking going to keep walking down this road over and over again, which we have been. The willful ignorance in this is astonishing.
Yeah.
I would say it's less a mental health thing as a mental hygiene issue, which contributes to the person's mental health. But when you just say like blanketly cross as mental health, that like contributes to stigma against people like who are right here with us, who have mental health illness but have good mental hygiene. So those symptoms are not going to contribute to their being violent, but more likely to be a victim than a perpetrator. I
mean, that's right. Like, to me, mental health isn't one super. I'm mentally ill. Doesn't mean I'm more likely to go murder a bunch of people. So there's a lack of nuance when people just throw out mental health as the reason. That's not nuanced at all. And the same is true. Like, you can't just say that purity culture forces people to go murdering a bunch of folks, but like, you got to look at how the direction that our violence takes is shaped by our ideologies. Like, this is kind of a no duh. So violence is going to go this way. I heard someone say, well, he was nuts. So if he didn't kill these people, if maybe without purity culture, he would just killed some other people. I'm like, oh, wow, that's a great argument. Like, that somehow it's incidental who he chose to kill. Like, that's enough. We could theorize that he would have killed somebody else if he was messed up in a different way. But we live in a world where people get messed up in this way, where purity cultures, there's sort of a self-hatred around sexuality, and that it has a racialized overlay.
Right. Yeah, I mean, part of the problem that I see with all of these discussions around incidences like this is that we have a really hard time moving from the particular to the general and vice versa, right? And so that we, we have some instinct that, okay, we can't take an individual and generalize to everybody, which is true. And we also can't start with a general and then say that's the way every single individual is going to behave. That's also true. And so, but then what people want to do is they want to wipe out that there's any connection.
Right? That's right.
Right. And that's also not true. Right. And so that sure, just because somebody has a mental illness does not mean that everybody with a mental illness is going to go shoot people. But when we see a particular thing happening, we actually can say some things about the general situations. And we have a really hard time moving between those two levels of conversation. It's just something that we're so kind of inept at. And it makes these conversations really difficult.
Yeah.
Well, two things about purity culture and mental health. One, we think of mental health in like a purity culture mindset a lot, general society, where like I've heard people say things that remind me of purity culture in regards to mental health, like that there's like one way that your mind should be, and as that regards to like Fascism Friday, mental health also has to do with like that kind of purity too, that like back in the day people with mental health were hidden off in the same way that we have to like cover up parts of our body because we're ashamed of ourselves because of purity culture. But also when it comes to sexual violence, mental health is often, like mental illness is often pointed to as a way for the perpetrator or harm doer to be sort of like off the hook. We don't have to hold them responsible. We have to give them treatment. I mean, if people were that generous with other kinds of things that really should get treatment instead of be punished, we would be a lot closer to abolition. But like in this one area, people are much more willing to, not everybody. Lots of people want them to be held accountable. But you hear about like, oh, but they're just insane and should get treatment for that instead of be held accountable. What accountability looks like, I don't know.
Well, and it ties in with what Dan was saying. Like, okay, I'm all for that accountability, but in these, it is a tricky thing to navigate, because on the one hand, this young man needs to be held accountable, but the system does too. There's some truth to the fact that he was kind of pushed in this direction by toxic cultural forces. It doesn't change the fact that he did it. But anytime we talk about accountability where it just all boils down to him being held responsible and then us not examining the systems that created him is a failure. And that's kind of what I'm seeing now. And for some reason, like, that's where the conversation wants to be, is resting upon him. And any attempt to talk about the larger cultural stuff gets pushed back from either side, really. By either side, I mean kind of the general Democratic posture and the general Republican one.
We got a lot of comments coming in, so let's get to that.
Joyce says, goodness, as a mother to 2, now 30 plus sons, I did this. May God forgive me. I mean, I resonate. Like, I don't know what I'd be like if I weren't brought up somewhat in this. But this is, I want to have some sort of hope that, that passage that says God works all things together for the good of those who love God, called according to his purpose. That passage somehow still works somehow. There's healing. There's healing for people through this, I think.
There's healing, but also never say that to somebody who just told you that they suffered assault. Please.
Dear God, yes, I agree. Yeah. Good point. All
right.
Aaron writes, last episode, Daniel said something to the effect of taking control of one's body, relating to folks being their whole selves in their sexuality and gender identity. It's an interesting contrast to what I heard in youth group, and truly believed for a while that I was, quote unquote, taking control of my body by repressing myself.
Right. Yeah, right. It's an interesting contrast. Yeah, and one great example, both of what you're talking about, Aaron, and Mark, what you were just talking about the individual versus the system. So for a number of years, I did spiritual direction work at these huge youth minister conventions. And so, in a given 4 days of the convention, I'd see like 40 or 50 people for one episode of spiritual direction. And there was one year where every single person that came to see me was having some sort of issue about their sexuality. Every single person. And either they felt they were a sex addict, or their partner was a sex addict, or they couldn't deal with their thoughts and feelings about sexuality. And so to me, that's a great example of, okay, you have an individual that's having a problem, but when you see 40 people that are having the exact same problem, there's something wrong with the system, right?
That's right.
They are all going to the same type of churches, and they're all hearing the same type of teachings, right? Repress your body, don't pay it, sex is bad. All the stuff, Ellen, that you had on your little ticket. And there's something wrong with that system, and it's malforming these individuals. It's crushing who they are, and they're suffering tremendously. And if you don't address that systemic reality, yeah, you can help the one person that's in front of you, but the system is just going to continue to crush more and more people. You're not really solving the problem writ large.
Mm-hmm. Juiced writes, to me, this sounds like a difficult topic. Well, it's a difficult topic. From what I read, and I'm only now reading up on it, not being from the U.S., he was on one side deeply religious and on the other side treated for sex addiction. Those to me are not opposite ends of the spectrum. May it be that somehow he hated himself for not being able to live up to the purity expected from him, and he felt he had to act on that in some way. Either way, it's very disturbing. Well, I think that's true. I mean, one, I think repression and religion, at least the way I'm hearing you use the word religion, are next to each other. They're the same part. The idea of him being addicted and trying to struggle against it is not him failing at his religion. That's him operating from that place of his religiosity. And of course he hated himself. That's the whole point of purity culture.
Yeah.
And he did act out. How he acted out was shaped by all the shit that was put into him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, you know, here's the thing, like, other people don't go out and murder people, but there's that impulse of blaming massage parlors for the problem of sexual availability in a way that seems wrong. Like, I mean, Jesus talked about this. As Jesus was talking about, it's like, well, if you have an issue with it, you should pluck out your own damn eyes. Like, that's his response.
Mm-hmm.
But purity culture wants to blame the source of temptation, vilify it, and then cause someone to see their relationship, spiritual relationship, as one of resisting sin and then repressing themselves. And so he was
well, and we
toxic.
you know we see this across the boards with all of these things that are, you know, considered these vices, right? So, you know, on the one hand, we want to denigrate sex workers, and then on the other hand, we got millions and millions of mostly men going to visit sex workers, right? And we don't want to admit that. And we don't want to say, well, sex workers should be safe and paid well. And obviously, a lot of people want to use their services, and we should acknowledge that and deal with it, right? Same thing with drugs, right? Americans want cheap drugs from all over the world. And then they also want to wage a war on drugs, where they're destroying the societies where a lot of these drugs come from. And they want to pretend like they're not using all the drugs. Like, why do we have all these drugs? Well, it's because Americans want them. And all of this is connected to purity culture and this repression, right? So, you know, we have thoughts and feelings, and we have bodies that want to do different things. And if you repress all of that, it comes out in all kinds of mostly not very helpful ways.
I think also eating disorder is a helpful analogy to purity culture, because they also go hand in hand. You hate your body, that you either can't handle the temptation and so you eat way too much, or you just completely eliminate the temptation and you don't eat anything when you're in the unwell state. The key difference both with eating disorder and with drug use is that we don't have sex with inanimate objects, but a human being. And I think that's a huge difference when it comes to eliminating temptation, or like having too much sex addiction, or like he literally said he was eliminating temptation when that's why he like shot these people, because purity culture treats our bodies like inanimate objects, like we're not people. And like Mark and I were joking before the show started that how do I know I'm not a robot? How do I know you're not a robot? We have to trust that other people we're interacting with are real human beings, right? And if you can like really internalize that, I think that's a huge step towards getting rid of or addressing sexual violence. Is how you were talking about like taking control of your body. Like I would say the way to combat that is promoting self-determination and reestablishing the humanness of the people. And like, those are good things no matter what we're talking about.
It's fascinating when talking about sex. And like, I want to acknowledge that every conversation about sex shouldn't just boil down to this, like the idea of consent isn't enough to talk about all the varieties of what healthy sex is. But the problem when conservatives don't even want to go there, because the moral framework isn't about consent. It's about whether or not this action is right or wrong. And so when you do that, instead of starting with consent as a framework, is you're cutting out the possibility for mutuality as a starting point for sex. So already the thing is about, you're a temptation object and I need to purge myself of the temptation, rather than starting from a place of like, I feel attracted to this person. How do I navigate this in a way that's healthy for me and respectful to them? And we negotiate or move forward in a way that moves towards greater explorations of intimacy. That's not the framework. And so when you do that, all of a sudden, like, it makes, to me, if I try to roll back into my conservative mindset from my youth, my criticism of this young man was like, you shouldn't murder. That's going too far. Like, I would have seen that as an overextension of the logic, but it's still an extension of that toxic logic. And people need to own that. And a lot of people aren't. CK writes, I remember an article years ago about the number of strip clubs per capita in downtown areas near courthouses and Capitol buildings, and it was a lot. There's all sorts of stories about sex work rates going up whenever there's pastoral conventions and stuff. Yeah. And this isn't just, to me, it's dumb just to think about it, in my mind anyways, as just hypocrisy. The issue is like, this secretive behavior to meet your needs is what happens when you approach morality primarily from a place of avoidance and a place of repression.
Yeah, at this youth worker convention, one of the biggest problems that the organizers had was how to deal with all of the charges, the hotel charges that the speakers would run up watching pornography in their breaks between their talks, when then they were going to talk about purity. It's just like, the person told me that, I'm like, okay, doesn't this indicate to you that there's something wrong with this entire theological system? And it was like, well, no, there's just something that's kind of hard about the accounting. It's like, no.
I mean, I'll pull back the veil, but I'm like using this principles of advocacy list, and assist in getting basic needs met is certainly one of the things that I wanted to talk about in purity culture. So like, yeah, getting like sex is a basic human need. So figuring out how to meet your needs is a good thing.
All right, we got a lot of comments to roll through. We're already almost at time. By the way, Aaron says hi to you, Ellen.
Aw, hi.
There you go. Hello, Ellen. Tessa writes, it seems they only point to mental health if it's to avoid pointing to white supremacy or sexism. That's a fair point. CK says anti-miscegenation laws. Not sure what is miscegenation laws?
Well, it has to do with, who you can marry.
Okay,
making sure you're marrying purely.
Yeah, and that's part of purity culture. People don't want to acknowledge that, but it's totally a part of it.
Well, and it's not ancient, right? I mean, there were these laws on the books until the 1970s and 80s in a lot of places, right? So, yeah.
Aaron writes, Joyce, every parent tries to do the best they can with the tools they have. I've forgiven my parents for a lot of stuff like this. They did their best. I'm sure you did too. And I hope your kids recognize that. It's the systems that taught you to teach them purity culture that is utterly screwed. Yeah, I think that's a good... I evangelized hundreds of kids into this system that I'm a part of. And I could feel guilt about that. But like, I was trying to be the most successful version of myself within that system. And so... I feel some guilt, but I feel more anger towards the system. I think that can be healthy.
That's part of why I wore my bangs like this today, to honor the momness when I was a kid, because like there's so much about being a parent that you're just trying your best. Yeah.
Juice writes, I wrote a reply here earlier reacting to what was said about the Atlanta shooting and deleted it because of the sensitivity on the topic. I'm hearing lots of very valuable things in this broadcast, and indeed proper care, not from the point of view of judgment, but from the point of view of understanding for mental illness is unfortunately not nearly as common as it should be. Don't get me started on the availability of support for mental illness. Going through a lot of that right now with my family and myself.
And we haven't even, lifted up the issue of the fact that these were Asian women and the horrible way in which Asian women are fetishized, right. And again, the on the one hand, the sort of purity culture of pretending that I'm this good, upstanding white man, and then having these fantasies about these exotic, erotic Asian women, and I mean the sex trade, sex tourism trade to Thailand is a multi-billion-dollar business, and the folks that avail themselves of that are not honest and open about what they're doing, and so, you take an individual that has whatever issues and problems he has to begin with, and you then throw him into this incredibly toxic stew of fundamentalism and white supremacy, and and the formation of that can drive people to very bad places. There's no question about it.
Joyce says, thanks, Aaron. They love me and are both leading full lives, so I'm content with where they're at.
It's good.
It's good. Gus writes, as someone who's been malformed by purity culture, I can't help but be worried about what kind of goofy ideas I have to pass on to my kids. There's lots of ways we parent out of our malformations, even once we've identified them. Hashtag fun with trauma. No, I totally can sense that. And, across the spectrum, we're all like touched by this kind of stuff. It's baked into our system, and so it comes out of us whether we like it or not at some level. David writes, the self-hate, projecting, and violent misogyny connected with purity systems is insidious and ingrained. Reminds me of this passage on Amnon's sexual violence and his feelings after it. Then Amnon hated Tamar with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. Amnon said to her, "Get up and get out." That's from 2 Samuel 13:15. That's another part of it. If we Christians, if we like our Bibles and find them to be a source of inspiration, whether low-level or high-level inspiration, we got to deal with the fact that this purity culture shit is all over in there. Mm-hmm. It's not the only thing in there. There's healthier ways of thinking about things. But let's be honest about where some of this is coming from and deal with it. Catherine writes, and I think this might be the last comment. Final word from Catherine. I'm glad you were able to chime in. Objectifying, sexualizing, shaming, and abusing people of color as a projection of a demonic sexual other is central to Christian colonialism. Think residential school abuses, genocidal sexual violence, eugenics, missing and murdered indigenous women, the demonization of black music as too sexual. Denying this is central to white Christianity as well. Thanks for
there you have it.
Putting it together, tying into a bow.
Yes, Dr. Parent wraps up the entire week in a brilliant fashion.
If my microphone wasn't part of the computer, I would just drop it for her.
There you go.
I'll break your computer.
Okay, well, this has been very powerful. Thank you all for your comments. Ellen, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for
Great to have you. And we'll be back next week with a different topic. I don't know what it is yet.
There's a few possibilities, but we'll figure out between now and Monday. We'll see y'all then.
Yep. Bye.